or red. All right, welcome to Moving Beyond Resources. My name is Bob Roberts. I've worked at Trifecta for about 6 years now. Most of that time has been with Salesforce or Heroku, usually a combination of the two of them. I have up on screen my Twitter handle as well as my blog. I don't post up often, however, what I do post up is almost universally targeted at Salesforce developers. So first, and I hope the only management-y thing I say tonight, I'm going to set some expectations. First, this will be a very shallow and incredibly broad overview of these tools and technologies. My goal was to, not to use too high-talking of terms, but to inspire you to introduce some of these into your own workflows and maybe either speed up your development, add new features, or generally help yourselves out. I would love to sit up here at the pulpit, for what it's worth, and preach that I have found the correct way to do web development. And I'm going to share it with you guys right now. But I can't. There is no right way. Anyone who tells you that there is, they're wrong. I can't tell you the right way. I can certainly tell you what the wrong way is, and it's that. Web development is an incredibly fast evolving field. As soon as you've learned about a new tool, one has probably already been deprecated. Tools are coming and they're going. Best practices are trying to keep up. But in reality, it's really, you have to find out what works best for you. And a lot of times that will involve going through a myriad of different tools and applications and literally just trying them out in a sandboxed environment and hoping that it scales up. Of course, there are blog posts, so you can read about other people's experiences, but you'll never know exactly what will work for you until you're the one who actually tries it. So a few prerequisites to start off. Everyone can read it. Yeah. First off, you're going to almost universally need a version control system. This is something like Git or CVS, SVN, TFS, Mercurial, I think, is a thing. You're going to need a place to store your code that isn't in Salesforce. The files we're going to be working with will eventually end up on Salesforce. But the source, the raw, unedited, commented, and you have worked with it source, that is not going to be out there. Were your development environment to go away for whatever reason, if you're a single developer, or if you were trying to hand this off to another developer, you would certainly introduce pain points by not being able to share your source code with them. So a version control system is the number one must. Second, again, we're not working directly in Salesforce anymore. So you're going to need some sort of text editor. At the most basic level, it has to edit text. It's right there in the name. Beyond that, you're probably going to want something that can interface with Salesforce in some manner. So you're going to be looking at Eclipse, Atom, Sublime, pretty much anything that can work with Maven's Mate. And as a serious plus, you're going to want something that can probably handle some plugins to do things like code completion or syntax highlighting, because that will make it much easier if you're just being introduced to these various technologies. Speaking of the technologies at the cornerstone and foundation, you'll want a familiarity with at least JavaScript and CSS. Now, you don't have to be able to immediately whiteboard up a function or the what is the foobar problem. You don't have to you have to be able to know from what you're looking at a general sense of what it's supposed to do, or at least what it might be trying to do. All the technologies that I'm going to talk about build off of these. So even though they're an extension, a good foundational knowledge will definitely help out. And finally, and this one is a little bit weird, and that's why I have the asterisk next to it, is Node and NPM. For everything that I show you, it will rely on Node and NPM being installed. However, you could deviate from this. Most of these tools have analogs or ports that don't rely on Node at all. So if you wanted to, you could technically run them directly from the command line, from an Ant script, Bash script, anything. You run the tools how you're comfortable. However, I'm going to say right now that if you are going to deviate that far, much of this will no longer apply to you. For everyone who's still here, introducing Gulp. Gulp is a build system that is built off of Node. See, right off the bat, I've already needed Node. And what it does, it allows you to name tasks and basically program up what you want those tasks to do. These are written in JavaScript, and it's pretty much a very light extension onto Node. So anything that is a valid Gulp program is essentially a Node program, and that's important because you can use npm for the plugins. Now, up here on the screen, I have those 5 lines at the top, and those are all including different plugins that I pulled from Node. Beyond that, if you have some code that you need to work with your build system, but you don't have a plugin for it, it is, I wouldn't say trivial, but it is not difficult to extend the functionality of Node and Gulp in any custom manner you see fit. And we're going to demonstrate that shortly, exactly how customizable this build system is. So the first things we need to do are, 1, we need to be able to, we need to understand that the files that we are working on are not the ones directly in Salesforce. Therefore, we have to have a way to actually view the files from within our pages in Salesforce. We'll need some way to actually serve those up so that whatever we're using in the pages actually works. And third, we're going to need a way to package these all together into resources for once we actually want to either deploy to a different environment, or if we are doing a push to whatever version control system we're using. So to solve that problem, and this is why I'm not making this full screen, because I'm going to start switching back and forth between code now. So we're going to make 4 components. We have the footer asset local, footer assets resource, header assets local, and header assets resource. Now I'm only going to open up 2 of these because the header assets resources and local handle things the exact same way. So I have these 2 components now. One of them calls this resource.resource bundle and includes our files. Our local one, however, completely bypasses the resources and heads to our own local machine. So these files, when this component is activated, will be coming directly off of our own system. That means that you'll be able to develop and you'll be able to see your changes immediately without pushing anything to Salesforce, but you will not be able to send this URL to anybody and expect it to work for them. When the page is loaded, it'll look for these files on their machine and it won't render. So that's the trade-off. Faster development, more access to tools, but you can't send this URL off. So if you're working with remote teams, prepare to get incredibly friendly with a screen sharing application. Now we need a page to include them on. I've included the headers up here, the footers down here. And the only difference in the rendered is that one of them has a knot in it. Both of them look to this custom setting that I've made up ahead of time that I've called development mode, and has a single checkbox called use local resources. When it's checked, I've set it up to look to our own systems for the resources. When it's not checked, and that will be your QA, UAT, CI, production, all those are not going to have this checked, and it will default to using the resources. So before you can get this working, you have to create that custom setting. You have to create that checkbox. And just in order to get it to use this all on the page setup, it has to be created as a hierarchy custom setting and not as a list. But that's just a small detail. And then we're going to need a server. Now, servers are usually a big, impressive bit of software to set up, and it can be sometimes intimidating. Luckily, Gulp makes it almost painfully easy. These 3 lines, 2 if you decide to ignore those trailing bits there, these 3 lines are enough to set up a server that'll serve up whatever is in the directory that it's currently under. So right now, that would be in my Gulp file, and that'd be under static. So I'd have access to my CSS and my JavaScript folders. I have also access to anything else in here, but we're going to focus on the JavaScript and CSS folders. And just as a quick overview, this is what a fully functional Gulp script could look like. We have constants defining what our plugins are. We have named tasks, and these tasks call a function, or they call other tasks. That way you can have one word, one line, run whatever you want it to. This default task is a bit of a special case. If I go to the command line and run Gulp without any words after it, then what it'll automatically do is it'll default to this one. However, if I ran web server, it'd run web server. Package, same deal. The package is what we're going to use in order to build up the resources. So all it's going to do is take the same JavaScript folders and CSS folders. That's what Gulp source does. It then pipes the result of that command into the zip method, and that's what we got from our plugin here. The zip takes an argument, that's the name of the file that we're going to be creating, and then once it's done creating that, it pipes the output of that into the destination method, which will spit it out into static resources. Now, before I got started with any of this, all I did was uploaded a empty zip file that I called resource bundle to Salesforce. And that means that I don't have to mess around with the metadata. I already have my resource file right here. It looks like gibberish because that's the text representation of a zip file. But in time, it'll come to have all of our JavaScript and CSS and whatever else we feel like putting in there. We luckily don't have to mess directly with the file. We'll let Gulp do all the heavy lifting for us. So far, all I've done is show you how to get the files into a state where you can actually view them. Now let's actually do something with those files. So we're going to give our styles some Sass. Now there's 2 major competing technologies out there for CSS preprocessors. That is, technology that takes an extension to CSS or a CSS-like language and runs it through a processor that results in valid, you can view it from the browser, CSS. So I've gone ahead and chosen Sass. The other one is less. Really, again, choice. The choice is entirely yours, whatever you feel most comfortable with or you feel fits the needs of your business. I've gone with Sass because that's what I'm comfortable with. In reality, they're both pretty equal, pretty similar. I'm not going to say that they're exactly equal because I know that I'm going to get some angry comments in the YouTube. So, what does this gain for us? it adds such helpful features as variables. So if you have a massive style sheet and you have all of your colors defined throughout the style sheet, and suddenly marketing comes along and says, we're switching from robin's egg blue to sky blue as our primary color, and all the colors have to change. Unfortunately, at that point, you'd have to go through and update all the colors in all of your styles and all of your sheets. And that doesn't sound fun or particularly effective for your time, and there's always the chance you'll miss it, and then you have robin's egg blue when you wanted sky blue. Or vice versa. I forget what my example used. With variables, you can define something like primary color. You load up the primary color value into that variable, and then everywhere else in your CSS, you can then access that. It gives you a way to have things defined in a way that you can easily change that variable, and when you rebuild your style sheet, it's everywhere. My example was trivial, but you start adding extra colors, maybe some defined fonts, widths. Again, marketing could come down at any time and say the style guide has changed, and that will not have to be an intimidating problem anymore. There's also the ability to import style sheets so that you have one giant style sheet at the end, but you work with them as separate files. And that's good if you want to keep things light and manageable and all sandboxed together. And it also supports nesting. And nesting is a bit of a contentious feature. What it allows you to do is it allows you to define CSS styles and rules from within other styles and rules. And when it's compiled, what you'll end up with is the parent rules or the parent ID or class. Those will be prefixed onto the inner rules. Pardon. So what that can do is you can suddenly sandbox a whole bunch of your styles simply by going ahead and in your page declaring a div with an ID, and then in your style sheet you declare all the styles in that page inside that ID. You don't have to suddenly go through and append that ID to each and every one of them. Logically, they'd all be added onto each other. Unfortunately, these are not actually understood by the browser. So you have to have the preprocessor go through, compute them all out, and give you the valid CSS you need. And luckily, we can jam this into Gulp 2 and have it do this work as well. So up to Gulp file number 3. I've added another plugin, Gulp Sass. Package is the same, web server is the same. So Gulp Sass, what it does is it takes anything in the Sass folder with that extension, it pipes into the Sass method, and this is a little bit of extra code to basically say if an error occurs, log it, don't die in some horrible way. So after it's now pre-processed your style sheets, take that result and just put in your CSS folder like everything else was. I've also went ahead and added watch. And this is incredibly useful for developing in such a way that you type up your code, you hit save, and likely, for a small project at least, by the time you get to the browser, when you do a refresh, your changes will already be there. So what Gulp Watch does is it looks at the Sass folder, and if there's any changes to any of the files, or any of the CSS files, it runs Sass for you. I've also augmented default so that it runs Sass first, starts watching, and fires up the web server. And as an example style sheet, here we have some variables. These could be your branding, or if you're a site that allows for some themes, color-based themes, you can have a number of different files with a number of different variables. And with a bit of importing, you can generate multiple style sheets without ever having to redefine the same styles for each and every theme. They all use one style sheet as the core and define different variables for the colors. We also have the nesting. So Wizard will get this border put on it, but any UL elements, unordered lists, any unordered lists only under Wizard will also gain a margin of auto and a width of 75%. And what this computes out to, you can ignore the fact that this is indented because it still has the brackets at the end. What this computes out to is we see that Wizard has been prepended to UL. Also, the colors have all been replaced by the ones we defined. And this is what the browser will like and accept just fine. Next, JavaScript. Now, JavaScript, when I began programming, was regarded as a toy language. It was seen as underpowered, buggy across browsers, especially since IE6 had not yet left us. Times have changed greatly. For the better, of course. Right now, the current standard is ES6 or ES 2015, depending on who you ask. They're the exact same thing, just I think ES 2015 is the technically correct term, but enough people use ES6 that if you Google it, you get plenty of answers. So it's the current version of JavaScript. It adds new and useful features like block scoping for anyone who's worked with other languages. That's a big one that catches a lot of people off guard. It adds things like generators, which every time you call it will result in a different answer, which sounds terrible. But if you're doing something like Fibonacci sequence or random, you don't want the same number every time you call random. Random is very much like a generator, and every time you call the method, you'll get an answer based on the internals of that method. It also supports things like a true map, which previously maps in JavaScript were handled just by having an object with named properties and whatever for the value. And what this often ended up with was, yeah, you could use it as a map, but occasionally some of the properties of just being an object would bleed into your source code and your results, and that was not good. The problem is, once again, that this is not supported by all browsers. Now, ES6 is a standard, so support is getting better. Most of the most recent browsers have a high compatibility. But as much as we like to work with the most recent stuff and the newest and greatest and latest, how many of us still have to support old versions of IE? IE 11, which is still pretty new, only has 11% compatibility with ES6. So you're looking at a huge chunk of features that you simply can't use. One version back, IE 10, an abysmal 3%. You're looking at almost nothing at that point. We could say that you have to use the latest and greatest of your websites, but that's not the reality that most of us live in. Enter Babel, or Babel. I've heard it pronounced both ways, so either one. Babel can transpile, that is, take from one high-level language to another high-level language. It can transpile from IE6 to IE5, which is by far the more supported version. It can also have some different sources and targets and that sort of thing. So for this, we're up to Gulp 4. Another plugin, Gulp Babel. Oh, and by the way, just as a heads up, all this will be in a GitHub repository. And the top of all the files list what they do and the required command in order to add that feature. Now that required command builds on top of the previous one. So if you're looking to implement gulp 4, the gulp 4 file, yeah, gulp file 4, goodness, I named these well. If you're looking to implement gulp file 4, you also have to run the commands of 1 through 3. And that is why I have this as sort of a building up pattern. So I've built up by including gulp babel. I've added a new task, babel. It takes the source files from ES6 over here. It pipes that into babel, and that uses a preset of ES 2015. So I'm telling it that right now I'm coming from ES 2015 or ES6, and I just pipe that into the JavaScript folder. I've also did the exact same thing as I did for Sass and added an entry to watch. So now any changes to the ES6 folder will automatically be compiled as well. It's gotten tossed onto the front of the default. So now running default will start up babel, or compile or transpile with babel, pre-process with Sass, start watching with watch, and serving up with the web server. Now it's hard for me to really demonstrate all the useful features because a lot of them get into really deep concepts that were outside of the scope of my talk. But just to show a little bit, block scoping. This is the block. Previously, if you had a variable up here and a variable in here, this would be redefining the one out here. Now, we go through, let greeting is equal to hello, this greeting is equal to welcome, this will print out welcome, and this will print out hello. We also have things like arrow functions, which make defining a function a little bit, it saves a few keystrokes and it looks neat, but the real power is in the fact that anyone who's worked with JavaScript long enough knows the pain of what does this mean in JavaScript, the object this. A lot of times it might refer to where you currently are, it might refer to the window, it might refer to the document, it could refer to a lot of things. With this, with arrow functions, this inside the function means the same as this outside the function. So no surprises there. And also, something I greatly like, anybody who has had a string of text scroll on well past the end of the page and keep going knows the pain of trying to read through that. Anyone who has seen, I would argue worse, multiple lines of multiple strings concatenated together with just plus sign after plus sign after plus sign. This, my friends, can help a lot. You can define a string with line breaks in it, and also it can take variables from outside of the string and automatically use them. That's why it's called a template. Template strings. There are some other features like maps and sets, but in order to use those, you need another piece of JavaScript, and right now that just doesn't demo very well. After it's run through babel, we see it now, and here it is. We're back to using vars, but now the inner greeting has been renamed just differently enough that we have the hello here, or the greeting here, no longer meaning the same as the greeting here. When we programmed it, we got to take advantage of the newer coding practices and the new syntax, but we still got to keep our compatibility. We also had this string flattened out and now concatenated with name. So now it's back to looking ugly, but at least we can code it and it still looks nice. Now, since very few of us work in a bubble where we get to work with only our code or our coworkers, we're probably going to have to pull in a library. So, libraries can get overwhelming really quick if you don't have a way to manage them. Maybe I or a friend, not speaking from experience, but there have been times where a friend of mine has seen projects with multiple versions of jQuery included in on them. That isn't helpful for anybody, especially not my friend. What this allows you to do is it allows you to pull in a single version of a library. You can manage what version that is. You can update it and have it documented that it's been updated. And then with Gulp, we scoop all those up, put them into our resource. We don't have to worry about necessarily having multiple ones on there. To do that, I went with Bower. People can also use NPM, the same thing that we use for all of our plugins. So if you want to cut out a tool, you can go with NPM. You already are using it if you're using all the rest of these plugins as well. It results in a different file structure than Bower does, and I'm just a bit more comfortable with how Bower lays it out, but entirely up to anyone who's using it. So this one is quick and easy. Let me just close out these. Gulp 5. So here we have two more. This one took a little bit more setup because it is an entirely different tool externally. So I had to install Bower, and then I had to initialize it. And what that does is it gives us a place to save our dependencies to. So what I did after initializing it was I went ahead and told it to install jQuery, Lodash, and reset.css. So it tossed those into Bower components. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take from Bower components, and I'm going to copy those directly into our JavaScript folders. Now, at no point is this in any way to condone that this is best practice. This is just best to demo in a very limited amount of time practice. So what I'm doing is I'm taking these and I'm just putting them with the rest of our files. And we can see here that they're called in the exact same way. They get put in there with the exact same class and status as our existing files. Nope, wrong one. So we have copy vendor JS and copy vendor CSS. And I've gone ahead and made these explicit because I want to have control over which files I pull in. I only want to pull in the minimized version in order to save a little bit of space as it's being transmitted. So I pull in the minified versions, copy those to JS and CSS respectively. I also went ahead and made a new named task down here. So I don't have to call both of these. I can call just one, and it'll automatically do both. I've tossed that onto the front of default as just another step in our build process. Now you'll notice that unlike the last two steps that I had, I didn't add these to watch. And the reason being is that because I'm explicitly adding these in, this is a step that I want to do manually. And with it comes the manual or the mindfulness of restarting the web server, reminding me that I have taken a very manual step. Take the time to actually consider what it involves. You can do whatever you want. If you want to have that automatically watched, that's fine. Doesn't matter to me. Now at this point, I haven't actually shown off how quickly these changes can be made. So we will go to my Salesforce org. I have a test page. It's just a list in a div with 4 bullet points. Now, one of the first things we'll have to do is right now is trying to call the files off of our local machine. Now, web browsers don't like this. The reason being is that they see that you're doing something that could be potentially harmful. What we're going to tell it is that we know exactly what we're doing. This is for Firefox. I'm not sure how it works for Chrome, so spot check it with your browser of choice. Anyway, disable protection, and that'll reload it. Anytime. And nothing changed, because I never started up the web server. So let's head into the command line. Now, I made everything that I'm going to use as the default. So I could just type gulp. We see that it has called all the different commands that I had defined, started a web server, and now it's just sort of hanging here. It's waiting. It's watching for file changes, and it's serving. Any file changes would be automatically propagated to their respective directories, and then those would be immediately served up anytime you refresh the page. So now when I'm refreshing, it's still ugly, but now it's the styles that I've chosen. I've chosen a red border around the div, and for the UL to be 75% of the width, and auto margin so that it's in the center. Now let's say we want a different colored border there. Our border is using primary darker. So let's, you know what? Let's take out the red entirely. Also, more green. Nope, more blue. So we have the style.css. You see the border is currently set to this. Save. Already changed. And a refresh. And a different border. Huh, that was green? I thought it was red, blue, green. I thought it was red, blue, green. Oh, it must be RGB. RGB. Yep, that's it. So I lied. I lied on a recording, and I'm heartbroken. So I have entirely intentionally changed this to be much more green than it already was. I can make another change down to 20% width. Over here at 75. Save. Oh, darn. Oh, yeah, it already changed. Wow. That was quick. By the time I had moved over, I had already messed up moving over. Anyway, it's changed to 20%. Refresh. And now it's smaller. So that's how quickly those changes work. And also in my JavaScript, I'm spitting out a whole bunch of junk because I didn't feel like rendering it to the page. Our welcome, our hello, and hello Bob, Rob, and Robert. I don't know, I just wanted my computer to say hello to me. Changes there happen just as fast. Go to basic.js, and where's the other one? There it is. So we have our ES6 version, our compiled version. I'm going to add another name. Tom. Hello, Tom. I've saved. It's already transpiled. I can refresh. It's still very angry with me for using local resources. But here we go. Hello, Tom. So that is how quickly these changes can be propagated to the files you need and then made available to the development environment that you have. And just for show, package. There. It's gone ahead, it's run package, and not that I can really show it to you. Oh, actually I can. If you remember at the beginning of this file was incredibly small. It was just an empty zip file, so it only had about maybe 15 or so lines. It has a bit more. And that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to see. Actually, I'll open that back up. If you did want to push this to your own environment, and you're using something that is built off of Maven's Mate and supports automatic compiling, saving it will automatically toss it up there. So you can technically turn off your static setting. You can switch back to using the resources in case you want to be very cautious and extra careful about what files you're putting out to other orgs. Now, we've got some time left. Is anyone wondering what could possibly be better than this? Probably not. I'm going to tell you guys anyway. First off, unit testing. Yes, thank you. At least one person is excited for unit testing. With Salesforce, it's mandatory that you have 75% coverage. But with your JavaScript, it's a free-for-all. No one tells you what to do, but you should have some unit test coverage. As we move from making web pages to web apps to whatever's on the horizon, JavaScript will become a more essential part of our code. It'll become a larger part of our code, and it'll become more of a possible hiding place for bugs. So, unit testing. I didn't include this because unit testing comes with a bit more configuration than I felt was appropriate for this talk. However, it's not too bad. There's numerous guides and outlines out there. There's, of course, like everything else I've talked about, multiple different tools and technologies you can use. And once again, the pattern remains, use what works for you. You can also make the code modular. Now, when I was showing off these gulp files, they all use this require to pull in their dependencies. Now, in traditional web development, you include dependencies by including them on the page. And this is a process with innumerable potential black holes. You could include a dependency out of order. You could miss a dependency. You could include the wrong version of a dependency. What ends up happening is your code has to rely on something outside of it to make sure the dependency is there. And that is a difficult prospect to maintain for incredibly large development. So with a few other tools, Webpack, Browserify, I know there's probably more. You can code with modules, and then during that building process, it'll automatically pull them in based off of what you define in here. And that's incredibly helpful because I can look at this file, and without reading a darn bit of actual meat of the file, I know exactly what this will need. I know that I need to install these on my system, and I know that at runtime, these will need to be made available. I don't have to rely on anything outside of this file in order to bring these dependencies in. And that is incredibly helpful. We can also do static analysis, and this is personally a love of mine. Static analysis can do two things. It can help maintain style across multiple different developers. For instance, you can define a rule that a function cannot be more than 100 lines. So if you have a little bit of a wordy function, it won't stop you from doing anything, but it will tell you that your function has exceeded some threshold. Also, if you have some developers who are prone to shouting and keep naming their variables in all capital letters, it can tell them that's probably not what you want to do. That's for constants only. You can use any number of predefined style guides and pardon, nature is having a field day with my lungs. You can use any number of predefined style guides and helpful static analysis tools, or you can have some customization in most of them. They can also spot some trouble problems before they pop up and come up to bite you. For instance, did you really want to do an assignment inside that if statement? Probably not. Maybe you did. It is a valid programming technique. 9 out of 10 times or higher, you wanted to do a comparison. This can spot things like that. And then there's images. Images make up usually the bulk of a page. So it'd be negligent for me to completely say that images don't matter here. If you have images in your resources, what you can do is you can run them through optimizers, and optimizers will compress it through lossy and lossless compression methods, and it'll strip out unnecessary metadata. So what you end up with is a smaller file size and happier users. Also, if you have a bunch of small files that you're using for icons, maybe a little cart icon, home icon, whatever it might be, and you're using them as separate image files, each of those image files has to be requested. And if you're targeting mobile, which mobile first, that's the mantra, if you're targeting mobile, then each and every one of those is going to be another request to the server. And if you're targeting mobile, latency is your enemy. What you can do is there are tools out there that can take a whole bunch of these tiny images, compress them onto a single image, and then give you useful CSS rule sets in order to automatically, well, basically you call the CSS class, you call the style, and it will find the right image in that one single image. So not only have you compressed it and optimized it, but now you've cut down the request from many to one. And that brings us to the unhappy end. Are there any questions? Yes.
I have a question. I'm kind of setting you up here, but let's say that you didn't have all these great tools and you were developing a JavaScript heavy project. Could you talk about what that would be like with just normal coding, like Force.com IDE or something like that, or maybe just make without these tools, and some of the issues or problems or pains with it?
All right. For one thing, setting up unit tests would be a bit more of a pain because now you're working with the resources. You'll likely have a mixture of zip files and text files in your resources. The text ones you can edit directly in your editor. However, the zip ones will have to be pulled down and extracted in some manner in order to actually edit the files you want. You're also likely to end up with conflicts from multiple developers pulling in and not noticing that other dependencies have already been added. The jQuery issue that my friend has faced on a number of occasions. That's how that pops up. With the CSS, you could end up with incredibly long and pointless style sheets full of redundant styles that could really benefit from being a bit more modular and a bit more concise. Now, I'm not saying that these tools will solve all of your problems, don't get me wrong. For instance, with the nesting, I mentioned that as a contentious feature. That can be abused heavily, and it can result in... I was actually on Twitter the other day, and there was a web developer complaining about how one of his predecessors had managed to build a multi-megabyte CSS file through nesting abuse. Don't let nesting abuse happen to you. But with these tools, more good can be done with judicious caution. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm curious, with Gulp, covered a lot of kind of core common tasks that you want to kind of include in a project for build steps. But one that I've used myself on non-Salesforce projects is like a live reload task. I'm curious, does that not work in Salesforce with like the mix between serving with localhost and within Salesforce that it can actually automatically reload the page on changes?
Well, I'm going to have to hypothesize a little bit. I don't see why it wouldn't. The main reason why I didn't go into live reload is mainly because I didn't want to add in the browser plugin. And the live reload is really a single line in Gulp, but it's just one more thing, and I was already pushing time in my practice runs, so...
So it's still something that could work in Salesforce as well.
Yes, and what live reload does, for anyone who doesn't know, is that when you make the changes, you no longer have to go back to your web page and hit reload. Usually a plugin in your browser will sense the changes from your local server and automatically reload it. So I'm not sure exactly how it will work, but nothing screams to me that that's a potential problem. Anyone else? Anyone? All right, then. I have a great set of links and references. This one helped me set Gulp up. The idea for the local server plus components was inspired by Angular Visual Force Seed and then refined a bit by Peter Knoll. The Gulp video tutorial series is excellent. It's nice. It's bite-sized, but it teaches you a lot of the concepts. I have a Git page out there with all the code that you saw today, as well as a blog post on using Gulp to manage your static assets, which was pretty much the predecessor to this speech. It's a lot of the setup and then focusing purely on the third-party assets. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Into the tunnel.